The words hit me harder than I expected. I had just come home from what should have been a perfect date when my neighbor looked at me with tears gathering in her eyes and quietly said, "She doesn't love you like I do." For a moment, the warm summer evening in our small Ohio neighborhood seemed to freeze. The porch light above us flickered softly, the distant sound of children playing faded away, and all I could do was stare at her. Because after 3 years of living next door to each other, I suddenly realized there was a story hidden behind those words. A story I had been too blind to see. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, hope, forgiveness, compassion, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. My name is Joshua Bennett, and at 34 years old, I thought I had life figured out. I worked as a physical therapist in Columbus, Ohio. I had a stable career, a decent home, and a future that looked predictable. Yet after a painful breakup several years earlier, I struggled to trust anyone enough to let them into my life. The only constant during those years was my neighbor, Abigail Carter. Abigail had moved into the yellow house next door shortly after her husband passed away from an illness. She was raising her young daughter, Grace, on her own. Life had not been easy for her. She worked long hours at the local library and somehow still managed to be the kindest person on our street. When winter storms arrived, she checked on elderly neighbors. When someone got sick, she delivered soup. When my father passed away unexpectedly, she sat beside me on my porch for hours. Without saying much at all, she simply stayed. At the time, I viewed her as a wonderful friend, nothing more, or at least that was what I convinced myself. Over the years, our lives became intertwined in small ways. Grace would bring me drawings. She made at school. Abigail often left homemade cookies on my doorstep. On weekends, we worked in our gardens together, while talking about everything and nothing. Yet somehow, I never noticed the quiet love growing between us. Then came Rachel. Rachel was confident, successful, and exciting. We met through mutual friends and began dating. Everyone seemed thrilled for me. Everyone except Abigail. She never criticized Rachel. She never interfered. But I noticed something changing. The laughter in her eyes became less frequent. She seemed more distant whenever I mentioned future plans. Sometimes, I would catch her staring toward my house from her porch before quickly looking away. Still, I ignored it. I was focused on building a relationship with someone I believed was right for me. Months passed. Then little cracks began to appear. Rachel rarely asked about my family. She disliked when I canceled plans to help others. She viewed kindness as weakness and generosity as something that should always have limits. The more serious our relationship became, the more unsettled I felt. One evening, after a particularly awkward dinner date, I drove home with a strange emptiness in my chest. As I stepped onto my porch, Abigail was watering flowers. Trying to sound cheerful, I told her I had just gotten back from a date. That was when she looked at me and spoke the words that changed everything. "She doesn't love you like I do." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, only heartbreaking honesty. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then tears filled her eyes. She apologized softly and hurried inside her house. I stood there alone, unable to breathe. That night, I barely slept. Every memory replayed in my mind, the meals she brought when I was grieving, the way she always remembered important dates, the way Grace ran toward me whenever she saw me, the countless moments Abigail had shown up when nobody else did. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself who I wanted. I started asking who had truly been there all along. The answer terrified me. A week later, Rachel and I ended our relationship. There was no dramatic fight. We simply wanted different things from life. Yet even after the breakup, I didn't immediately go to Abigail. I needed to be sure, not because I doubted her, because I didn't want to mistake gratitude for love. Over the next several months, I paid attention. I paid attention to how peaceful I felt around her, how naturally we understood each other, how Grace had become like family to me, how every important memory of the past 3 years somehow included Abigail. One autumn afternoon, I found myself helping Grace build a birdhouse in the backyard. The golden leaves drifted through the air. Abigail stood nearby smiling as her daughter proudly showed off her crooked little project. And suddenly, everything became clear. Home wasn't a place, it was a person. It was the woman standing 10 feet away. If this story is touching your heart so far, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like these remind us that love often arrives quietly, disguised as friendship, kindness, and everyday moments. That evening, I invited Abigail to sit with me on the same porch where she had spoken those unforgettable words. I told her she had changed my life. I told her I finally understood what real love looked like. Not grand gestures, not perfect dates, but consistency, sacrifice, patience, and unwavering kindness. The tears that filled her eyes that night were different from the ones she shed months earlier. These were tears of relief, of hope, of a dream she had almost given up on. 2 years later, we stood together in a small church surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors. Grace proudly carried flowers down the aisle before running into my arms afterward. The little girl who once lived next door had become my daughter in every way that mattered. Today, whenever people ask how Abigail and I met, we smile and tell them we were neighbors, but the truth is much deeper. She loved me long before I learned how to love her back. She saw the best version of me when I couldn't see it myself, and her courage to speak one honest sentence changed the course of our lives forever. As the sun sets beyond our porch each evening, I often think about how close I came to missing the greatest blessing of my life simply because it arrived quietly instead of dramatically. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone special, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of hope, faith, and second chances. Because sometimes the person meant for your future isn't waiting somewhere far away. Sometimes they've been right next door all along.